Okay, let's go ahead and call tonight's Budget Committee meeting to order, please. Good evening. So tonight, we are going to be starting out with some public comment for the first 45 minutes of the evening, after which we will take a 5-minute break and then move into consideration of motions and discussion. Based on the tenor of our conversation last week, and knowing that a few counselors, I believe Counselor Evans, Counselor Surratt, Counselor Taylor, I don't know about anyone else, but are going to be absent next week. Anyone else that knows they're not going to be around next week?
I'll be absent tomorrow night, too.
Oh, okay. But given that we know that there'll be some counselors who will not be around next week, I'm hopeful that we can complete our deliberations tonight and tomorrow night. So our goal, of course, at the end of these sessions is to finish with our recommendation to the city manager for the full FY15 proposed budget. So with that, we will go ahead and start the public comment period. So for all of the people who are here tonight to give public comment, just so you know the process, when I call your name, I'll call 2 names. The first person will come up to the microphone, and the second person probably should just move closer to the front of the room so that you're ready to go next. You'll have 3 minutes to speak. 30 seconds prior to the end of that 3 minutes, you'll hear a buzzer, and that's kind of your notice that your time is almost up, and you might want to wind up your comments. And then just the last request, if people could just hold applause or anything like that, please, that would be really nice. We want to make sure that everyone has the comfort level to be heard and to feel comfortable making their comments. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. So I have first Linda Ague, followed by Bob Sigmund.
Call Chris that 30 seconds prior.
Hi, my name is Linda Ague. I'm in Ward 4. I want to thank the Budget Committee for allowing us to express again our hope that we can maintain library services. If I understand the current conversation, the Bethel branch will remain open. That is wonderful. I am here to encourage you to also use the one-time funds available for the 1-year extension for services at the Sheldon branch and the downtown library. I know you have heard from me before, but I am here again to represent the people I spoke to yesterday as we handed out information again outside the Sheldon branch. People who may not be able to be here tonight because they no longer drive in the dark, or the kids who have basketball practice but were still part of the 100 or so people we spoke to in a 2-hour period, or the mom who is homeschooling her children and relies on the library for reading and instruction, or the 82-year-old man who feels that you may not be interested in what he has to say because he isn't poor enough or young enough to be of concern. I am happy the Bethel branch will stay open. I know it will be good for that community. It would be just as good for the residents of the many senior communities within a quarter mile of the Sheldon branch. It will be just as good for the young families that crowd every story time at the Sheldon branch. It will be just as good for all of the diverse community growing to the north. I urge you to give us the year to join with you in finding ways to create the funding to save the libraries. I promise to help you then if you promise to help all the people relying on library services now. Thank you.
Thank you. Bob Sigmund, followed by Jane Mukawi.
Hi, I am Bob Sigmund. I live in Ward 2. I'd like to thank the members of the Budget Committee for allowing me to speak tonight. Before the Budget Committee decides to solve a large part of the budget shortfall by shifting the burden onto the backs of UWeb stormwater ratepayers, city staff should be upfront about providing realistic estimates of what it will cost ratepayers on a monthly basis. Will it be $5, $10, $20 more per month? And you have to ask yourself, who are these ratepayers? The majority will be senior citizens, students, lower income people, and small business owners. Yes, the same people are struggling in this community right now. Folks on Social Security receive a measly 1.5% cost of living increase in January of this year, and as you probably know, they're not eligible for step raises. When you think about increasing stormwater rates, you begin to wonder if this fee is the example of the perfect tax for the city of Eugene. The rate can be increased at will. The money is collected by another public agency, and the collection mechanism can be very onerous in most cases when the ratepayer is unable to pay on time. In other words, the city carries a big stick. In closing, I'd just like to remind those on the Budget Committee who in this community will be shouldering this extra burden. Thank you.
Thank you. Jane Mukawi, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, followed by Joy Marshall.
Hello, my name is Jane Muhawi. I'm not sure what ward I am. I'm Mike Clark. Came here on the bus. It's pretty wet. My husband and I live north of the river. We don't get downtown very much at all, and we really heavily depend on the Sheldon Public Library. If they shut our Sheldon Public Library down, it basically means for us not much in the way of library services anymore. You know, I don't really understand why it is our library services are shrinking. Where I'm living, to the west of me, they're building this huge Riverwalk complex. To the east of us, they're going to be building a senior citizens residence, 300-odd units. Where are these people going to go to the library? Are they all going to come downtown? I don't know. I just would like to really please don't shut my library down. I'd pay a fee. I don't care. I think if you could have somebody who has the money to pay a fee, they should pay a fee if they can keep it open. If this one-year thing will help to get some solution up there, I'm all for it. Okay. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Joy Marshall, followed by Cindy Clark.
Hi, good evening. Thank you very much for the chance to speak tonight. And I want to thank all of you for the time that you put in the many hours, especially the citizens who are doing this as volunteers. We really appreciate it. I'm here for Stand for Children. Many of you know it. It's a grassroots parent and community group that advocates for education, and we have 300 local members. And we voted to ask you not to cut back any of the libraries at all, and there was not a single no vote in our members because libraries are so important to children and to others. And we've worked with a lot of just grassroots citizens who really, really feel deeply about this issue. And I've counted, and we have about 175 people who have attended your meetings recently to show their support for libraries. And I don't know how many hundreds of emails you've gotten. I'd say sorry, but it's good, right? It's citizen democracy. But I think that is an incredible show of support, and I don't think you get that very often, as I understand, for any single budget item. So I really ask you to think about that outpouring of support from people. It's so important. And I know you know the statistics, so I think I'll just tell you a story, a picture. Is I thought I should go and really spend a little bit of time at our branch libraries and see what it looked like from the viewpoint of what if we lost them. And at both branch libraries, I saw parents with toddlers. Maybe you could take one toddler downtown on a bus, but I saw 2 or 3 and big stacks of books. You know, this is something that makes it affordable to read to your children. I saw seniors who parked right by the door, got their walker or their cane out and walked slowly to the door, and they had access to a library because they had a neighborhood branch library. And I saw teachers bringing students, and one very touching scene I saw was a teacher bringing their life skills students, about 5 life skills students. So those are the students with the greatest emotional and physical challenges. But because they had their small neighborhood branch library, they could bring their class in, and the students had the freedom to walk around. They had the ability to take that bus ride, that short bus ride, to their neighborhood branch library. This is huge to their quality of life. And this is at both of the branch libraries. So I think as a community we have to really realize that our libraries are key to our quality of life. They're key to a child's experience and to our seniors. But speaking as a children's advocate, especially for all those kids, it's key, and we don't want to limit access at all to them. So I really thank you for any support, the support that you can give. I've been lobbying for a long time. I've lobbied a lot of you more than once, and I know money's tight, and I know the saying that, well, gee, what else should we cut? But I also know that you have discretion, and you can prioritize, and that's why you're here. So I urge you to prioritize our libraries. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have Cindy Clark, followed by Sandy Lodeman. We did not have a buzzer that time, so I'll raise my hand if I see the time is almost up and we're getting close.
So you mean I have to stop at some point? Is that what you're saying? Wow, man. All right. Well, hi, my name is Cindy Clark. I reside in Councillor Clark's ward, and I've been before you before, a few times at least. I am a City of Eugene employee. I also represent approximately 600 employees at the City of Eugene. And I'm here to speak on behalf of the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, which is something I've spoken about before. I just passed around page 47, again, something I've spoken about before. So this is a reflection of last year's report of how the budget was spent, and we've got $13 million that were left on the table at the end of last year. And I'm curious to know, some of the money, I know where it went, some of it appears to be unallocated, and I'm wondering why we wouldn't use that to help shore up our budget for this year. It really seems that the service cuts and the service workers that provide those services are being eliminated by choice, not by need, and I'd like some clarification on that. So when you look at page 47 of the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, it refers to general fund. Down at the very bottom, we've got the reserve for next year's spending that was almost $4 million, and that was money that was reallocated for this fiscal year to cover the gap from last year, and I get that. We also have the reserve for revenue shortfall, which is $4.9 million. That's money for the savings account, which I get is prudent. We want to make sure that we have money in our savings account for the rainy day for future needs. We also have $1.5 million in other reserves. Doesn't indicate where that's going. Other reserves is what? City Hall maybe? I mean, who knows? It doesn't say. But then at the very bottom, we have $2.9, almost $3 million that goes in unassigned. Why wouldn't we reassign that $3 million to shore up our budget for this year and retain the services that our community needs, that our community demands, that our community has come out in droves at all these multiple meetings that you've held and said, please, save our services, don't make these cuts. So it comes down to, in my, I'll admit, less than humble opinion, these cuts are by choice. If we have the money, and every year we have millions of dollars left on the table, every single year, millions of dollars are left on the table at the end of the year. Why don't we use those for the next year to help shore up the budget? Why wouldn't we do that? So I'm just here to appeal to your sense of community and see if there isn't another way to balance the budget without eliminating all of these jobs and services. Thank you for all of your work.
Thank you. Sandy Laudeman, followed by Howard Bonnet.
Hello, I'm Sandy Ludeman, and I'm from Ward 5. I'm here to speak about the library, and I want to start by thanking you for maintaining the support for the Bethel Library. And I'm also here to talk about maintaining the Sheldon Library and following through on the plan that was presented to, in fact, go into those reserves that we just heard about, to maintain it for a year, to make a plan to do a library fee. And again, I will back Linda and Ague and say we'd be glad to work very hard to support that kind of plan. But I'm also here because I too sat outside the Sheldon branch yesterday and heard from numbers of people, and I just wanted to share one story with you. It was from a young lady who lives, and in fact, in the sheltered housing that is behind the Sheldon Library. And she talked to me quite lengthily and said, I want you to talk to these people and say, look me in the eye, do not close my library. Thank you.
Thank you. Howard Bonnet.
Thank you. My name is Howard Bonnet, and I was here before, and I thank you again for making the opportunity to make final comments. I wanted to first talk about the recommendations for the park funds. The recommendation to move some of the services into the stormwater fund, I think, makes sense. I'm hoping that it doesn't result in a increase in the stormwater funds, because then that would just be starting another tax rather than just saving some money. The proposal to not water the parks has been tried before. I'm not sure when it was, but maybe some of you remember, and the outcome of that was weeds. Weeds actually do much better a lot of the reason is because of their physiology than grass does, and so I think that's, at that time, turned out to be a mistake, and I think it'll be a mistake again to do that. I'm not in favor of the myriad of social cuts that are included in your list, including scholarships for needy people in the athletic program, including funds for homelessness and so forth. I think all of those cuts should be taken off the table, and I think the cuts for the neighborhood program should also be taken off the table, or at least largely taken off of the table. That's been tried before as well. We need the neighborhood programs. It serves a really valuable function in the community. So I support the comments of the speaker before me, the one before me, in talking about reserve funds. And I think this year there was something like $800,000 that was put into the fund for the City Hall. This has been an ongoing fund use of general funds which are collected for services and instead are put into the capital budget. And I think they should be taken back out and used to provide services as they were intended when I paid them, at least. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much to all members of the community who came out tonight to share your thoughts with us. It's very much appreciated. Thank you. I'm going to assume no one needs their 5-minute break yet, so we will postpone that and leave that open. Yes?
I do have a question in reference to the public testimony. I was wondering, Mr. City Manager, if you can address the concerns about the other reserves and unassigned. What exactly are those, and where do those money come from, and where do they go?
I'll start, and then I'll ask either Christy or Sue to kind of fill in more of the details. I want to iterate again that we do use reserves every year during the budgeting process. So we do use reserves every year during the budgeting process. So I know we've heard a lot about we should use our reserves. I'm just saying we do. And so that was part of the purpose of a couple of those graphs we showed last time that showed the line sort of going all over the place. And so that goes up and it goes down. And so we do use the reserves partly to cover or to anticipate higher costs like PERS increases that we're now able to help mitigate those, as well as some other financial things that have occurred. And it also allows us to not have to make as deep a cuts as we otherwise would need to make. And so, not everybody liked that comment, apparently. But then maybe, Sue, you can talk a little bit about the other reserves and then the unassigned reserves as well.
Right. The other reserves is a property tax appeal reserve, and I'm sorry I did not bring the detail with me, but I think that also includes some of the equipment replacement dollars. And in terms of the unassigned amounts that show up on page 47 of the CAFR, remember the CAFR is as of June 30th, 2013, and that amount, every year it's going to be the same concept. That amount that shows up as unassigned is what you will consider on Supplemental Budget 1 in December. So you did already take action to dedicate those dollars to various things when you approve Supplemental Budget 1.
That gets.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Are you asking a question?
I have a question on this subject. Do we know what the unassigned balance is right now?
We won't know that until after our audit is done for FY14, so we'll know that next in December.
I see. Sure. Okay. Thanks.
Any other questions about the CAFR before we? Okay, great. So we are now getting ready to head into our discussion process. So as motions happen, I just want to reflect back on the spring, and as motions happen and amendments come and amendments to amendments come, it can get kind of crazy and kind of muddled. So staff is going to be working diligently to type as we go and put things up on the screen and that kind of thing. So please just be patient as we work through getting stuff up on the screen so everybody can kind of follow along with where we are. So, great. Did you have a question?
No, I'm getting in the queue.
Okay, all right. So a couple people already emailed to be in the queue earlier, and so I said that at this point I anticipated taking them in the way that I received them, and so that means Councilor Clark's motion is the first in the queue. And so first of all, I want to make sure this is...
Well, I'll get to that here. I need to make it and get a second.
Good.
But I thought what I'd do here first is just say that based on our last conversation at the end of the last meeting we had, I thought that the manager's budget came through with nowhere near the level of real pain and hard choices that have been the case in the last few years, certainly, and that we anticipated through the process of the 6 months of work that we've done, and I think that work led very well to him being able to propose something that's closer to go. I wanted to make a little tweak to it, but found that it was in its whole acceptable to me. So my motion will reflect that I move to recommend to council to approve the manager's full recommendations, all his recommendations, not just the budget numbers, but the two other side pieces as well.
Second?
Okay. Additionally,
Yeah, we got to make sure you know what we're seconding.
I will say that I would like to amend one of his secondary recommendations, that instead of waiting until December and we get the financials and we see what the cash carryover is, to go ahead and fund the $250,000 for HSC up front from the reserve for revenue shortfall. And now that I have a second, I'll speak to that if that's okay.
Okay, so just to make sure, does this accurately reflect your motion? To approve the manager's recommended
Move to recommend to council the manager's full recommended budget and additional recommendations,
Okay.
and fund and I suppose to say with one change to fund $250,000 for human services from reserve for revenue shortfall rather than waiting until the 6-month term.
And Councilor Polling has seconded, so the motion has been moved and seconded, and so as the mover, you
Thank you
can
very
speak
much.
first.
For us, well, we all know that reserve for revenue shortfall is really that single-digit percentage that we all decide that's from this year's funds. It's not a savings account. It's from this year's funds. And it's the amount we all decide not to give the manager permission to spend. It's the amount we allocate, we leave unallocated to something as the cushion of, in case cash doesn't come in the right way, in case expenses aren't what we expect them to be. It's the intelligent, prudent cushion. We'd like that cushion to be bigger, so over the years we've tried to make that a little bit a healthier cushion. But in these difficult times, the question of how comfortable should that cushion be is an appropriate question. And for me, these agencies that we're talking about with HSC will be facing the question, will we have extra money after the 6 months? And we have for decades, as near as I am aware. It's been a very long time since we haven't had that. So we're fairly certain that we're going to be allocating that money in the way the manager suggested it. From my perspective, though, that 6 months between the 1st of July and December, for us is a very small difference. But for those agencies, it's a very big difference. For them, not knowing whether or not they'll have that money for sure forces them into a very defensive position, maybe perhaps to lay off staff. And we know with relative certainty that we're going to have that money and that we will intend to fund that. So since we have the money, the degree of its effect on the cushion is so small, and to give them that level of certainty, I wanted to make that change to the manager's recommendations.
Great, thank you. So first person in the queue is Councilor Polling. Oh, is Councilor Brown first? Okay, good, thank you. Councilor Brown, you're first.
Thank you. I'm ready. I'll approve the second part of this, but I won't vote for the first part. I think it's premature. I mean, after all, eventually we will have to approve once we agree on all the elements. But I think it's just a little premature to make that include the first part of the motion, because after all, it was just at the last budget meeting that we saw the recommendations, and we've been digesting them since then. And we still have to discuss several elements. I want to have a little discussion at some point this evening about the stormwater, the transfer of park services to stormwater. And I know other people want to talk about the library, and other people want to talk about LRAPA and things. So I just think it's just premature to approve the whole thing with that being the only amendment. So I won't support this right now, but after we talk about everything else, maybe I could.
Thank you. Councilor Bowling.
Thank you. Yes, I'm prepared to put out a motion if Councilor Clark's motion does not pass, but I am at this point willing to support his motion. After listening to the testimony of the last few nights and tonight from people talking about the library, the hundreds of emails that we've received over the past few weeks about the library services, I feel that it's very important that we keep both the Sheldon and Bethel branches open. In the past, I've been pretty critical about using reserves or one-time monies to fund ongoing services. It comes a point in time where you've got to make a decision, and on this one, I think the decision I'm making is I'm willing to go ahead and use that money for the 1 year to keep the Sheldon branch open, because that's what the people want. That's what we've heard. Not only the people that live in Wards 4 and 5, but throughout the entire community. I think you could probably count on one hand the number of people that have said, yeah, go ahead and close the branch libraries, we don't need them. Majority of the people, overwhelming majority of the people said keep them open. Some of the folks have come up with suggestions on how to do it. Others have just said just do it. So at this point, my biggest contention about the proposed budget was the library. I feel there are certain areas within our budget that have not suffered any budget cuts over the year that I think should. I think there's some areas in our budget that should be completely eliminated. But I'm not going to take that task on because I know what the votes are going to be. So at this point, I think John and Christie and all their folks have done a remarkable job putting together this budget, and I'm ready to move forward and then start looking at next year. And again, we're still meeting, the revenue team's still meeting, and hopefully we can come up with a solution to permanently or more permanently fund the branch libraries.
Thank you. Councilor Surratt.
Thank you. Well, I definitely appreciate the motion from Councilor Clark, but I do agree with Councilor Brown. There's still a couple of things. I, for one, hope to introduce a motion to restore funding to LRAPA as one small thing. But I very much appreciate the thinking around the funding for human services, and glad to not be the only one at the table making the case for the uncertainty that can cause for those agencies, even though we may have a lot of confidence that the funding will materialize later. I did have a question if you wanted it to read HSC or Human Services.
I believe I wanted it to read HSC, and I wondered about that when I saw that as well.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for that clarification.
Sure.
Specifically, we're talking the Human Services Commission discretionary funding.
Correct.
Correct, with that HSC.
So the allocation.
As the manager had it listed.
Good clarification. Thank you for that.
So I'm kind of sitting in the same position as Councilor Brown in that overall I like the the motion, and I'm getting encouragement to move to amend. But I actually needed to ask the city manager a question before I could make my motion on LRAPA. So I'm getting conflicting information about how much our funding for LRAPA was, and I apologize, I didn't do my own research before today. Our page 19 of our budget strategies indicates it was $30,000 one time in FY14, but I thought it was $50,000, or is that $30,000 just talking about the cash contribution?
The $30,000 is the cash contribution.
Gotcha. So if I was going to move to amend to add back, I'd want to make the motion in the amount of $30,000 if I wanted to keep what we did last year.
Correct. That would mirror what this current budget. Yes. It would mirror
Okay.
that.
So I wouldn't need to worry about the in-kind piece of it in terms of our budget discussion.
Right. That's correct. That would be the If you want to mirror what you want to mirror, then it would be the 30,000 in cash.
So I'd like to offer an amendment to the motion that we restore funding for the Lane Regional Air Pollution Authority in the amount of $30,000 as an ongoing budget item.
Is that a friendly?
I hope so.
So is that,
The maker accepts it as a friendly?
so I don't think
Is it
we,
one-time or ongoing?
I think once it's out in the body, we have to discuss it as a body. It's not, I mean, when I read the parliamentary procedure, there's really no such thing as a friendly in that way.
Oh.
It comes to the body discusses it as an amendment, so.
Pardon, point of order, if
Yeah.
I could. In council protocols, I'm using the wrong word, our process agreements, friendly amendments are a part of the council process agreements for how we...
I don't doubt that. I'm happy to grab the parliamentary procedure and read it to you. Would you like, would that?
No,
Yeah.
I apologize. What I was saying was that city committees operate under the same rules as council process agreements. It's my understanding. I may be wrong about that.
I don't know. That's something I don't know in terms
That
of the
is the
process
case.
agreements.
Anyone?
You know, Glenn can come up and talk a little bit about that as well.
Good, he's okay.
I don't mean to be, I was just trying to expedite the
No, I
process.
appreciate that. I just
believe
want us to be
that's
clear. Yeah.
the case.
A very little bit, I'll talk about it. Councilor Clark is correct. That is the council protocols. However, the protocols, the issue with friendly amendments is what the council has been doing. They've been doing it for more than 25 years. That doesn't mean that the Budget Committee or any other committee has to accept it as chair. It is always your prerogative to say that's not the rules of the Budget Committee because it's not in the written rules of the Budget Committee. So if you say you're going to follow Robert's rules strictly, you get to do that, and so then it could just be processed as an amendment.
Thank you for the clarification. I appreciate that. So
Well, then I'll
interesting.
second that amendment in that case.
Thank you. So moved and seconded. I just want to make sure we captured it correctly. So are you saying, do you add your sentence to the original as a sentence at the end of
Right.
Councilor Clark's? Right.
Yeah, I'm not replacing anything.
Right, okay.
It's amended.
So the motion before us is move to approve the manager's full recommended budget and additional recommendations. And I guess we would take out with one change for
The
this
word.
amended one, right? Right?
And
to fund the $250,000 for HSC from reserve for revenue shortfall, rather than the manager's recommendation to wait till December, and include $30,000 in LRAPA funding.
And so I still have a little bit of time.
You do.
So, and then, of course, I forgot what I was going to say. So Councilor Clark has seconded my amendment. So I can speak further to why I believe the LRAPA funding should remain. This is a intergovernmental agency that gives us local control over our airshed, how we manage it, how we permit in terms of controlling air pollution, and our ongoing commitment to that agency is very important to its continuing to be able to operate here locally, as opposed to losing that local control and having to rely on a more statewide DEQ operation. And I will take another round.
Okay, great, thank you. And
Can I just clarify real quick, because what I think you said is include ongoing 30,000, and so what I wanted to see how I think we would operationalize that. We would put 30,000 into this current budget, and then if this passes, then what our intent would be is next year when you come back with a budget, it will be included in the budget going forward. So that would be
That was my intent.
understanding of
that would be the understanding we would have.
Okay, so thank you, Councilor Surratt. So we are starting, do we start a new queue for the amended? I think we do. So Councilor Pryor.
If this will actually apply for both.
Okay.
It fits for both. It's a point of clarification. We do not have a recommended budget before us. The recommended budget has not been prepared at this point. The only thing we have are recommended strategies. So I would, and the reason I'm bringing that up is we won't have a budget until April. And when we have a budget in April, then there is also opportunities in April to talk about the contents of that budget. So we're not finalizing the approval of the budget at this point. I would say that what's being proposed needs to be clarified to say we're not moving to approve the manager's recommended budget since we don't have one. We're moving to approve the manager's recommended strategies for the budget, which is what this document is, this binder, with blah, 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 the rest of it. And it's a clarification I think is important because I don't want anyone to feel like we're finishing all of our work tonight and the only thing left is to vote. We're simply saying the strategies you've presented us so far seem to be appropriate for you to use when you prepare the budget that you'll bring to us in April. And so I think that's important to know that we're not done. This is just one more step in a process. So there will be plenty more time to discuss and comment. But this gets us one step closer to a recommended budget.
I'll second that if the language change was a motion.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that we should, so recommended budget.
Move to approve the manager's budget strategies.
Right, okay, so insert the word strategies. Yes, yeah, great. Okay, thank you. So Marty, I have you next.
I guess I need a little clarification. Are we debating the amendment by Councilor Surratt, or are we now debating another amendment? Or?
No, we are debating the amendment by Councilor Surratt.
Okay, I'm supporting it. I was going to make it if she didn't, but I guess I just want to say, if we take things from revenue shortfall, I think one of the things the revenue committee is going to do is take that as certainly a goal we want to hit, in addition to whatever else we do in terms of the options we present you. So I would take that as probably how we're going to take that. I would also commend the process of just voting on these specific exceptions that different people want to make. Since we already have the Christmas tree, let's vote on each ornament under this Christmas tree rather than accept or reject and cut off debate on the whole process.
Great, thank you. I put myself into the queue next, so I will support this. And I want to thank both Councilor Clark and Councilor Surratt. I think there's some really good thinking here. I really appreciate the thought about how do we deal with the HSC funding and the impact that could have for those agencies and what that would mean in terms of their inability to potentially do the service that we as a community do care about them doing. And I also support restoring funding for LRAPA. I think that's a critical thing for our community. If we don't have clean air and clean water, we don't have a whole clean air in this case. That's pretty much a first priority. I also support this because I really appreciated, as I said last week, the thought that the city manager and the staff put into creating some recommended budget strategies that really reflected what we heard from the community, as well as what we had talked about earlier as a committee, and listening to the community with hearing about we really value libraries, we really care about these resources for our community, and that this provides us with an opportunity to work with the community to craft a long-term way to fund those services. That I think is exactly what we need to figure out, because clearly what we've heard is those are critical resources from an educational standpoint, from a community standpoint, and from just how we develop the people and citizens. So anyway, so I will be supporting the amendment at this point. So I saw Jill, and did I see someone else? No, okay. Jill.
Can I ask a question? Point of order, City Manager. So if the libraries were mothballed, the doors were closed from June until November, all right, so there could be the library levy could be put to the voters. Could you give me a ballpark of what that would cost? So, in other words, don't end the lease, pay the lease, and lay off the person, or what that would cost approximately.
I don't know if Renee can answer some of that, but what I would, I guess, offer is the most difficult piece would be is the employees.
Right.
And so if we laid off employees for that period of time, if we're going to keep the employees and keep the lease, we should probably just keep the library open, because the savings is actually in the facilities and the personnel costs. And so if we lay them off and then rehire in November, is that what you're thinking?
Right.
I don't know how much we would cost. It would be difficult on the employees, but
right.
I don't know.
I understand that. I was just wondering from a practical point of view approximately what the cost would be, and then it's going to lead me to my next.
We really haven't scoped that scenario
you could have asked me about 100 other scenarios. We did not. We have not scoped partial, a closure and then bring back. It's.
Okay, that's fine. I just want to know if you kind of had an idea.
And John articulated it would really be the impact on the employees, which I'd really not want to put them through.
So now I can make comment. Okay. So my concern with this, and I appreciate the HSC, really important, LRAPA, all these things are really important. But I remember sitting here last year and saying, we need another year and we're not going to kick the can down the road. And that, as a citizen member, I wouldn't run my business in a way where I just keep using credit. And it reminds me of what you said last week, Laura, that, because of the city in the past, we lived amongst our means. We now need to find a way to pay and find a way to do this. And I myself, the idea of closing libraries or cutting HSC funding is just, it's like intolerable. And also Councillor Polling basically said, libraries, we've got to keep libraries open, right? Even though he doesn't even like to use one-time funds either. My thought is, if we close, and I want the libraries, but if we close the libraries, laid off the people, put the referenda or the levy on the ballot in November, and as we're talking about in the Revenue Committee, not just bring back basic services, but bring back full library program in Sheldon and Bethel, and maybe expand into the fourth floor. So give the voters something, not just like, please fill our little gap that we don't have. Here's a full program, but give them understand that if you don't vote for it, it's not a threat. It's that we're reserving the rights to open it back up again. But if it's not a threat, if you don't want to vote for it, then we're just going to have to close them, okay? And I'm thinking the people that you lay off for 6 months, which is sad, and I don't want to do that either, but if they come back in a full library program, then they would have more hours. So it would be a sacrifice for 6 months, but then they would have more hours. So I guess I just would like to, as a citizen member, remind everybody that last year we said we're not going to kick down the can down the road, and here we are kicking the can down the road. So, thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments, discussion? Councilor Brown? You're speaking to the amended motion.
I'm speaking to the amended motion. Yeah, I still think we're kind of jumping the gun here. The meeting's just started, and we're ready to approve the whole ball of wax. I'm almost there, don't get me wrong. I thought that what was presented last meeting was, a vast improvement over what we've been looking at before. And but I still think we need to have at least a short discussion about, before we approve the whole shebang, I think we ought to have a discussion about the stormwater fees and the park being added to that. I'm not opposed to that strategy, especially as a short-term basis for 1 or 2 years. I think as a ongoing strategy, I think we're headed down a slippery slope. Because looking in the CAFR, stormwater rates went up last year, and the fund took in $1.1 million more than the year before. Did anyone realize when you looked at how many people examined your bill? It just happened. I bet most people weren't even aware of it. And so, when you keep adding things that normally come out of the general fund to the stormwater fund, and a lot of things, there is a connection. There is a logical connection. I just hate to see that become a permanent strategy, because pretty soon, what do? You go, well, hey, the rain hits streets too. Why don't we transfer some of the street repairs to the stormwater? You know what I mean? It's not a big leap. Once you start down that road, you can think of all kinds of things. And here's the deal. I sit on the Metropolitan Wastewater Commission and Management Commission, and whenever a rate increase happens, we have a very detailed, sometimes passionate discussions about the effect on the ratepayers. In this case, it's strictly at the, guess who sets the rates? The city manager. Doesn't have to talk to anybody about it. Now, I'm not suggesting that the present manager or future managers would abuse that position. I think they would be sensitive to it, but the point is it's the discretion of one person. And so I am, I can accept it for, as, you know, like we're using one-time funds for a few things. I think that's okay for a short-term strategy. But as a long-term thing, I think it's a really bad way to go. So maybe I've said my piece, and maybe that's the whole extent of the discussion. I don't know if anyone else wants to talk about that too, but I think it's a real, because look, that's $600,000 that we're going to transfer. That's 25% of the shortfall. I mean, that's a significant, yeah, $2.5 million, that's almost 25%. So it's a significant transfer of funds, and I don't think we've examined it closely enough.
I have Councilor Pryor for a second round. Is there anyone else who would like a first round before we go to that? Okay, Councilor Taylor.
Thank you. This isn't about the amendment, but following up on what...
So I think we're discussing the amendment, though.
But that...
Are we discussing the LRAPA amendment?
That isn't what...
The LRAPA amendment specifically.
That isn't what I just heard. Were you discussing the amendment?
Started there and then
okay.
Evolved.
Okay, if we get... I want to say something about that, too, but I will vote for this amendment. But my question is, if we pass this motion, then does that mean we're not going to discuss anything else like the Stormwater Fund tonight?
Well, if we pass this amendment, one of the recommendations from the city manager, as I understand it, is to use the Stormwater Strategy. Therefore, we would be, if we vote for this, we would be voting to utilize that.
Then the time to discuss that is after we pass...
No.
After we pass the LRAPA amendment, then that is the time to discuss that, right? Okay.
Yes.
I'd like to be in the queue for that.
Okay. All right. Great. Thank you. Okay. So again, right now, we're discussing the amendment. So, Councilor Pryor.
Thank you. With regard to the $30,000, we're having the discussion about is the $30,000 one-time or is it ongoing, and exactly what the ramifications of that are. And I really appreciate the comment that, you know, we wanted to hold the line, and we said we would try to hold the line, and that's what the budget strategies were trying to get at. The reason I'm willing to support the amendment, and I'm kind of where George is, my basic feeling is no, we should not kick the can down the road. But every once in a while, you're trying to budget. Trying to balance your response. And in this case, I think we've done a pretty fair job of reducing the size of the can so that it's no longer a giant pudding can, it's now a small little V8 juice can. And so we're not kicking quite as large a can down the road, and I'm hopeful that by next year we won't have to kick any can down the road. But I think I am willing to one time make an exception for a much smaller can in order to continue to do work that needs to be done. So these additions, I think, are ones that say, yeah, it's not what we had originally wanted to do, but they're important enough that I'm willing to just kick that little smaller can a little bit longer, knowing that we're going to eventually get to where there's none at all. But it's a balance. It is a balance. And so I'm willing to go ahead and do it this one time, but it doesn't, to me, violate my basic principle, which is to not just keep passing the buck year after year after year.
Thank you. Okay, if there's no further discussion, then we will vote on Councilor Surratt's amendment. So at this point, we're voting. So do we read the whole motion? Do I need to read the whole motion?
Just
the amendment. Okay.
There will be two votes, yeah.
Yeah, okay, so we're voting to amend the motion
There'll be three.
Ongoing $30,000 in LRAPA funding. So all those in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, and so the motion carries, so we will include the amendment.
Don't be opposed.
Oh, I'm sorry, thank you. Opposed, please raise your hand. Okay.
Can I ask a question? It's just the amendment, so we're not
Right.
voting on the motion.
That's
We
right.
can vote
That's
yes on the
next.
amendment. Okay.
Correct.
Okay.
That's right.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. So,
That's the
three
whole fun of
opposed, I
this
believe,
stuff.
right?
There were 2 no votes, and everybody else was a yes.
Higher for the noes. Noes again, please, Mark?
We're Mark and
Councilor
George.
Foley. Okay, 2 noes. Okay, so now we will go back to discuss the amended motion. And I have Councilor Taylor in the queue first, and then Councilor Brown, and then Will, and then Marty, and then Councilor Surratt.
Put me in there, too, as well.
And Councilor Clark. Okay, so Councilor Taylor.
Thank you. If we pass this, does that include funding the Sheldon Library?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And I think Following up on what George said, I think if ever anything deserved a sunset, it would be the stormwater funds being used for park maintenance. We've had sunsets on things that I think didn't need them, but I think that there should be a sunset on this if we pass it, if we pass the budget. And I move that we make a sunset of 2 years from now on that.
So are you moving to make an amendment?
Yes,
to add a
amendment to
clause
sunset
this?
on the parks maintenance stormwater funds, on the stormwater funds used for the parks maintenance.
Okay. Do you have a question, John?
Depending on if it gets a second or not.
Yes, we have to see if
Second.
there's a second. Okay. Councilor Brown seconded. So let's just make sure we get the language correct. Move to amend to sunset the use of stormwater funds for parks maintenance after 2 years.
Yes,
Is that correct?
that's correct.
Okay. So the discussion on the floor is now about the amendment. So I will start a new queue for the amendment that is different from the original queue. John, did you have a comment before we go into the...
Yeah, I just want to talk a little bit about that. I kind of understand what maybe people are trying to do with that. What that does is effectively, it's 2 years of one-time money, so we're back to that same conversation. But the other piece of that is, it really is the conversation we really will need to have is about a sustainable funding for parks maintenance is really the long-term conversation. And what I would suggest is that's the conversation that the council engages in sometime over the next 12 months, not putting a sunset on these particular funds, because these are actually going to be paying for things that are stormwater related. These are not unrelated things, and so they actually do fit very well into the stormwater fund. We just haven't been using those dollars to fund them in the past. So it's stormwater money for stormwater kinds of things. But the longer term conversation really is about parks maintenance, which then we should come back and have that conversation, which really then, if we resolve that, that also then ties into some of these other conversations. So that would just be my suggestion.
Great, thank you. So are you finished speaking
Well,
to your amendment?
I'm concerned about raising the stormwater fees. I'm concerned that this will lead to that. And are you saying it won't?
What I explained last time is I can't guarantee that it won't. What we're talking about, even if it were, it's pretty small amounts, in tens of cents, 50 cents. It's not $10 kind of things. And two, with our stormwater, just like any other utility, what you do is you take a look at what the entire expenditures are in that, and then you set the rates appropriately. So when and how much, we don't know. We do increase them by CPI on an ongoing basis, like all utilities should do. And so is there zero impact? No. Is it a large impact? No.
But we don't get to discuss when you raise those rates.
You always have the option of the council discussing any rates that are being proposed. Yes, so you do have that option.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, great, thank you. I have Councilor Brown and then Councilor Clark.
Thank you. Well, we have that option, but I've been on council for 5 years, and we have never, ever had a meeting, unless perhaps one of those rare occasions when I was out of town and missed a meeting, but I attended on phone pretty much every time I was. I don't believe that we have ever had a discussion on the rates going up, and 1 year they went up 12%. So, and also, you know, this, I think what this does is maybe we'll keep in our minds the discussion, and I agree with the manager, we should talk about this more in depth later as a long-term permanent strategy. But you know, next year we're going to have a different budget committee, maybe a different council. 2 years, maybe a different budget committee, maybe a different council. They can always extend the sunset or do away with the sunset entirely. It's not like, you know, this is a cast in concrete here, this decision. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilor Clark.
Thank you. I appreciate Councilor Taylor's desire to try and get us through this moment. into, in a comfortable and in a way we can all agree to move forward, but to not enable a permanent change. I have some concerns with that change myself. So there's a part of me that wants to support your amendment. Mr. Manager, can you tell me, I seem to recall that council had some discussion of a work session to create a strategy for parks maintenance, and I would say that I would probably only vote no on this amendment if I knew we had a work session scheduled to deal with a parks maintenance strategy.
We're happy to schedule anytime council wants, not just because of this motion, but it's an issue that's been out there for the last several years, and we've had a couple conversations. So what our thinking has been is we land this FY15 budget, and then we create a stable financial situation, and then we need to start having the conversation about sustainable budget, which includes the parks maintenance piece. And so our intent, regardless of this motion, was to start having those conversations after this budget is landed.
I'll do this. I will say that as Chris has so wisely pointed out, this is the body's will to the manager to tell him what kind of budget to bring us back, so that when he does, we have very minimal effort at what we need to do to pass it, because we have had some of these discussions already. But knowing that we have that time, and knowing that we then have more time before council passes finally a budget, I'm willing to vote no on this right now, only in the sense that I'm going to want to see a work session on parks maintenance strategy and dealing with, and my understanding of this is a short-term strategy. Even if I vote no on this amendment, I will work to see us end it as a strategy at some point once we do this larger conversation about parks maintenance.
Mayor Pearson.
Do you want to say something?
You want to say something, Glenn?
I can say it. If you're talking about this motion, I just want to say something about this proposed amendment.
Just a clarification, because I want the public to hear that the current way we deal with fees for the city is council gets in their packet that a fee is being raised, and we've always had the message that if you have any problem with this, it can be brought up by council for discussion. So that is an ongoing, if council wants to do that differently, they can do that differently, but that's currently the way that we have been doing things for as long as I've been around it, and we've been told numerous times that you can bring that forward if you want to bring it forward. So I just wanted to clarify that for the public.
Thank you. Did you have something you wanted to comment?
This motion, the amendment, attempts to dictate not what would be in this budget, but what a future budget committee and a future council and a future city manager, or this city manager in a future year, would have to do. The budget committee gets to say, and ultimately, when you vote on the budget, you are voting on what is in the FY15 budget. You are not voting on what is in the FY16 or 17 budget. And what this motion is doing is it's not saying what should happen with the FY15 budget. It would be dictating what should happen in a future budget, and this budget committee doesn't have that authority.
So does that effectively nullify this proposed amendment?
I don't have the ability to rule a motion out of order. The chair does.
But I can't, right, but
yes.
That's what I hear you saying.
Yes.
So, okay. So given that input, thank you very much, I'm going to rule this amendment out of order. So at that point, that means that we are going to go back to debating the motion that was previously on the floor, which is Councilor Surratt's amended motion. No, I'm sorry, you're right, but the main motion with the amendment included.
Main motion as amended.
Main motion as amended, thank you. But I'm going to suggest we take our 5-minute break now, and then we'll come back and do that.
Regroup.
Who's next?
So I have Councilor Taylor, Councilor Brown, Will, Marty, Councilor Surratt, Councilor Clark, and Ken.
Don't need to talk now.
Okay?
I always think
Oh, this is getting exciting. Okay. Councilor Taylor's off, Councilor Brown is off. I'm sorry. Will, did you say Marty was off?
I want to talk.
Okay. So I have Will, Counselor Surratt, Counselor Clark, Ken, and Bob. Okay, super. Let's take 5 minutes. We will. Thank you very much.
Thanks for that clarification, Mary.
Okay.
Don't do it.
Thank you. We're returning. Hopefully we had time to stretch our legs, lobby one another,
Renew and
pull our
refresh.
thoughts together, renew and refresh, etc. So now I believe staff has had a chance to pull together the motion that is before us now in its amended form. So move to approve the manager's full recommended budget strategy and additional recommendations with the following changes. $250,000 for HSC from reserve for revenue shortfall, rather than the manager's recommendation to wait until December, and include ongoing $30,000 in LRAPA funding. So that is what's before us now. And Will, you are the first person in the queue.
I mostly just want to clarify and make sure we're all on the same page here. So we have a document that was given to us, so it's 128 pages, that in that document recommends cutting the Sheldon Branch Library. And then we had a PowerPoint that had one slide of path forward options that was not part of that 128-page document that said to use one-time monies to keep the Sheldon Branch open to the tune of $362,000, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
So I just want to make sure that the motion on the table includes the one-time money for the Sheldon Branch, because it's not clear. Like when I was looking through the big document, it's not in there. So
Yes, it does.
okay.
That's why I said full recommendations. I don't know if that captures. Good question. Yeah.
But good question, good clarification.
That is good.
Do you have anything else you'd like to add?
That was it. So we're doing the first of his path forward options is addressed by Mike Clark's first recommendation here.
Right.
And the second. So my only question then would be, what fund? Because Mike has designated that it's the RRS fund that's going to be supporting the Human Services Commission. What fund are we pulling the $362,000 out of for the Sheldon branch?
It's that same.
Also the
yes.
Okay.
Okay, great, thank you. Counselor Surratt.
Yeah, so Will actually got to what I was going to speak to as well, was just to clarify that when we're saying additional recommendations, we're referring to the one-time funding of the Sheldon Branch Library while we look for a more long-term sustainable revenue solution. And so revolutionary solution. No. So and along those lines, I think that's really the missing piece to help those of us who are concerned about the one-time funding and or the stormwater fund transfer of parks maintenance, is that it can be characterized as kicking the can down the road, or it can be characterized as taking the time we need to develop the revenue options, which will be done in a public process. We'll have time for public input, irregardless of what form we decide to take in terms of the revenue options. And so I think we're sending a strong message to the city manager about what our priorities are and how we want to approach a sustainable budget. I mean, I think he's heard that the transfer of park maintenance to stormwater causes people concern, and we want to look for other options besides that. But we're all right, maybe a majority of us, to do that this year for this FY budget. So I think the council could buck tradition and ask for a work session on the stormwater fee when we get that memo saying it's going to go up or not go up. So I feel good about where we are in terms of these are strategies. We'll come back in April or May with the full budget document, and we can rehash this all again if we want to.
Or not.
But I think this is good conversation. We can continue to talk about, Councilor Brown may have some other specifics he wants to talk about, and I think they can be addressed by, discussing the main motion.
Thank you. Councilor Clark.
Pass. I think everything's been said.
Okay. Bob.
I want to thank Will and Councilor Surratt for the clarification. That was
where I was going to kind of be going. With this, I do have a question of our city manager. With this motion as it's standing on your recommendations, how is this going to affect FTE cuts? How many people are we actually going to be cutting? Are those going to be through attrition, or will they actually be layoffs?
I don't know, Christie, what detail of information you have.
Well, there will be FTE impacts, but the change in the Sheldon Branch Library will reduce that. I think I have that number. Let me look in my binder here real quick, but I think that number was 14, and it reduces by approximately 2.5 FTE after the Sheldon Branch Library decision. So, but let me take a quick look, and if it's different than that, I'll confirm that.
Okay. That, at this point, I'm pleased with this motion. I will be in favor of the motion as it's been amended and presented tonight. I think this gives the manager a clear indication from what this committee would like. I think we have heard the input from the citizens as to what they would like for the services that we provide. I think there's great hope for us with the revenue team to maybe be able to find other sources and generate new revenues that can help minimize this type of impact, and that next year we won't have to look at getting into the reserve fund. And really, when we're looking at about $660,000 out of the reserve fund, which is a whole lot less than what we were talking about last year. And when you look, as Marty said just a few minutes ago, with the total scope of the city budget, we're literally debating over a very, very, very small percentage.
Thank you. Councilor Brown.
Thank you. I just have one clarifying question, kind of following on what Will Shavers asked about the Sheldon branch, and the recommendation was to keep Sheldon open at the service level of last year, which was reduced, from the year before, a couple years before, and then close the main downtown library half a day on Sunday. Is that correct? Okay.
Correct.
Right. Yeah, and I just kind of like to reiterate, I think it's a good idea to do for this year, to do the parks maintenance, transfer that to the stormwater fund. I've been looking at the end of year balance in the stormwater fund the last few years, and it can handle it. But as a long-term strategy, I think it's mistaken, because the historical amounts were, FY11 was the ending working capital was $8 million, then it was 7.6, then it was 1.2, 1 million, and that's 960. So as a long-term strategy, well, we can talk about that later, but I'm not opposed to doing it this year. Thanks.
Did you have an answer to the
I
question?
do. Sorry. Just want to correct that for Bob. So that number started at 12, and if you back 2.5 out, about 9.45 is actually the number, 9.5.
And are those vacant positions, or?
There are some vacancies, and there are some folks that are in those positions, and we'll continue to do what we've done over the last few years, is be really aggressive in terms of holding potential landing spots for people, and the goal is to really reduce the number of folks that would leave the organization involuntarily. So we'll work really hard to accomplish that.
Thank you.
Anyone else who would like to speak to the motion before us? Marty?
Just to take back to the Revenue Committee, what's the total amount, if we approve this and it goes through a full budget document, that would come from the Reserve for Revenue shortfall? Because I suspect we'll take that as one of the marks. Is it just this 280, or was there more?
Well, you have the 250, the 30, and then the library, whatever that is.
600 something. I think 42. Different than 912.
642.
42? With the 30.
Okay, seeing no one else in the queue, I'm going to go ahead and call the question before us. So the motion, as you can see, it is on the floor here. So all those in favor of the motion as amended, please raise your hand. Say aye. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4. 13? Okay, 13, all opposed? Okay, great, so the amended motion carries, and we will be moving forward. Voila. We do not need a meeting tomorrow evening, we do not need a meeting next week, and we will look forward to seeing one another again in April. Okay, thank you all for your great work. Have a good evening.